Hey, what's going on? We are live. This is the Pre-Chiro podcast. My name is Dr. Ben Glass, and I've been just trying to have conversations with people that I really respect, that are fellow chiropractors, also chiropractic students that are willing to share. And today we have Kweli. Thank you so much for taking some time to share with us today, brother. Can we get started by you just giving some insights into what your life was like, what your upbringing was like, and sort of how you discovered chiropractic before going on to chiropractic school?
Sure, Ben. How you doing? Um, I was raised in Arkansas, particularly Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which is a black college town, home of our previous what was known as Arkansas A&M College, now University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. And I was pretty much raised in a middle class family. My parents and grandparents, as well as uncles and aunts, all were teachers. So my mother was a biology professor at Spelman, and my parents were divorced. So I was kind of oriented towards science even in high school. So I took all the science prereqs and which would be the day's equivalents of what advanced placement classes, AP classes,
Mm-hmm.
chemistry and so forth. So I went to Fisk as a pre-med major and was a chemistry major and did well. We were on track for the 3-year program to get into Meharry Medical School.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 20, however, though, I changed my diet and I became a vegetarian. This was back in 1976. That diet change precipitated a whole different shift in my consciousness. And so then, and I changed for a reason. I had pretty severe asthma, and the diet made a big difference. So that flipped me out of the basic allopathic orientation. And I even changed my major to philosophy. So I finished with a philosophy degree with basically just short of 3 hours short of a chemistry degree. Uh, and so when I came out of school, I was more interested at that time in natural medicine. I decided not to go to medical school, which was a great disappointment to my family. I had my great grandfather and 2 uncles on my mother's side had been physicians. So I had been kind of just groomed and brainwashed to do that. At the same time, I was still interested in health, so I started studying homeopathy on my own when we came out west in '81, and I studied under a lay practitioner, Dr. Iskandar Guy, who was basically a psychologist and practiced as a homeopath. And roughly for the next 5 years, worked with him pretty closely. I still worked as a printer and became a high school teacher in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
And long time around the time my mom died at age 29 is when I just decided to go on and further my studies. And interestingly enough, chiropractic was kind of like a compromise choice. I initially was going to go to chiropractic school primarily to practice homeopathy, but once I got into it and found I had a real knack for it and had a pretty good hand, and I like the simplicity of chiropractic itself, that kind of shifted me, and I've since then tried to incorporate all of that into my work.
Most definitely, you do. I've experienced it firsthand. You've also been an author of many different books. Can you speak about the responsibility maybe that you feel to share with your community some truths that you've maybe discovered or that you've done research on your own? Can you talk a little bit about your creative process outside of practice? Because I know that you've been involved in many things besides full-time chiropractic practice.
Well, alongside the change in consciousness around health, I also underwent cultural and even political self-transformation. I changed my name. I became more aware of myself as an African person. Got more into indigenous forms of healing and thinking. And so by joining the movement, per se, I grew up already in the civil rights movement, so I was always conscious of that. But at that same time, I started reading more specific political books. So with that, I joined a Pan-Africanist organization in New Orleans called the Haitiana. And we did Kwanzaa. We had a school that taught from kindergarten through 5th grade. I taught in the school for a while. We did collective buying. We had a bookstore, and we did various political campaigns. And so these were seasoned political activists that I came into contact with, who were 8 to 10 years older than I was. And they put us through a very rigorous political study process. This was the first time I started reading James and Grace Lee Boggs, Amilcar Cabral out of Guinea-Bissau, Africa, the revolutionary leader. We sat down with a South African leader named David Sabito. He was known as the Malcolm X of South Africa. And it's interesting, we were in New Orleans and we had on datikis, and he came in a suit. He had just come from the UN, making a presentation. Sadly, this brother was assassinated 2 weeks after we saw him when he went back to South Africa. So those experiences just kind of put me on a political course. At the same time, I was on this health course, and they just kind of converged. And in many respects, I went to chiropractic school to allow myself to work independently within the Black and poor and working class communities to serve them. So I kind of went in with that mission. And alongside my chiropractic career, I taught Upward Bound at UC Berkeley Mills for 32 years, English. And so I have a constant connection with young people. Primarily, I taught the 9th graders how to write. And but we had a highly politicized Upward Bound program where we wanted them to be critical thinkers. So for me, chiropractic, which is an alternative health system, at least in America, in terms of indigenous arts, of course, chiropractic is mainstream. It's probably the oldest form of healing on earth. But in America, as an alternative practitioner, it fits right in with alternative politics and alternative even spiritual views, not just to be alternative, but basically trying to look a little deeper than just what's presented to us growing up here in America.
Mm-hmm. So if I'm a student in high school or college these days and I'm hearing your message right now, you've been able to serve as a mentor to many. You've been a chiropractor in clinical practice. You've written a number of books. You've been also involved, it sounds like, in some political movements and just raising cultural awareness within your community. How do you see the opportunities existing for young people today, given the current climate, given the current mediums of communication, whether it be through the internet or whether it be in the community itself? Obviously, this year is a bit of an anomaly, but are you currently mentoring any younger people? And if so, would you speak a little bit to like how they can make an impact these days in their community, how they can show up for their people?
Well, that's a lot to unpack there. I guess the first thing is in terms of just who and why would I recommend a young person to go into chiropractic? And I say that overall, I would recommend any young person, a particular person of color, to go into chiropractic, but I have to put an asterisk by it in the sense to really pay close attention to the financing of their education. And that's the major flaw right now in our profession, is that the lack of available funding for education to prevent young doctors from coming out in such deep amount of debt that you're basically digging yourself out of for the rest of your career. If they can figure that one out, and however they do that, I sometimes tell young people to try to focus on buying a house before they go to chiropractic school, and then they can refinance the house to finance their chiropractic education. But with that said, it's wide open. Even though chiropractic is the largest so-called alternative profession in America, there's only 110,000 chiropractors worldwide, and only 70,000 in the United States. Compare that with over 300,000 physical therapists. So the profession is wide open in terms of opportunities, and practice in 90 countries right now, in various degrees of licensure. But in Africa, particularly in Ghana, there's been a presence for the last 25 years or more. And so as those worldwide opportunities open up, I think that gives people a lot of alternatives. Um, as of late, I've been kind of big on trying to forge other ways to make a living too, based on my chiropractic training, because there's a lot of information that we know and that we learn, but outside of teaching within chiropractic school, we often don't have avenues to get paid for what we know. And within the last 4 years, I've been able to kind of break into the consulting business. I consider myself a health technology and wellness consultant, social change consultant, and have been able to make money on basically what I know and skills as a writer as well. And so the chiropractic knowledge, particularly in the realm of exercise, somatics, um, prevention, and even treatment. I've gone to some of these of our retreats that are nonprofit retreats and worked on people. You know, so that's one of the things that I would like to share with young doctors right now, to think of all the various ways that they can make an income. Even though they come out and you want to just practice, that's fine. But given your age, your physical abilities, at times people sometimes get injured. Chiropractic is very work intensive. It's wears on your shoulders and back. So there are times when you may not be able to practice to your full capacity, and so you want to think out of the box and try to come up with some other ways, particularly like in this COVID period. Quite honestly, I would have been in pretty rough shape if I had not had some consulting contracts during the entire COVID period. So I would just tell doctors that explore a lot of these ways, and you still practice. I'm still in practice. I haven't been in the same office now for going on 29 years. Uh, and that, as you can imagine, that's not easy either, because landlords still want their rent, whether dime or not, But um, but all in all, I would say that the level of independence, the level of sense of empowerment, the ability to kind of chart my own course as well as control my day and time has been worth the periodic, say, stress at times around all the ins and outs of practice. And I tell anyone that you have to have a nervous system that can deal with degrees of uncertainty, and you have to have kind of a headspace that, for the most part, allows you to, one, trust your skill, talents, and abilities, but you also have to be able to trust the universe and not panic when things are not going your way business-wise. Because I tell doctors, just because you have your doors open doesn't mean people coming in there. And at the same time, you're not really competing against anyone either. Sometimes doctors think, oh, we're competing. You're not really competing, because the people who you really can help are the people that are going to find you. And it's not like somebody else couldn't help them, but they can't help them in exactly the same way that you can. So the idea is to be positive in your thinking and be open to, this is metaphysical, but but the universe sending the people to you that really need you, and trusting that process. But I'm all that's to say that everybody's nervous system is not geared to do that, and some people need a regular check. And if you need a regular check amount, then you're going to have a hard time in this profession because it takes a while to get that, And what we call that is having a reserve. When you have 6 months to a year's more of rent, basically as overage in your checking account, then you can kind of relax. And the times when I've had that going on was sometimes often my most productive years in writing and doing other things, because then I could focus, you know. But I would tell anyone to try to explore all of their talents and skills. The initiative, drive, and courage it takes to become a chiropractor is the same qualities that it takes you to become an artist or a business person in software or anything, you know what I'm saying? So you have to generate it yourself each day. And it's almost like psychic. I used to almost say in the first years, I paid my rent psychically each month, because there'd be times when you get to the last few days and you still wouldn't have much money in, and you just have to just do certain things within your mind and keep yourself positive, and things happen, and everybody's process is different, but I would definitely say that the process of working for yourself involves your whole self. And if you can't really see it in a spiritual sense, you are probably robbing yourself a lot of self-growth that can go along with advancing in your business.
So thank you so much for going deep into the different avenues that a chiropractor can take beyond practice, but also the inner workings of a chiropractor in progress, so to speak, that inner drive, that inner motivation that you need to have to develop yourself first and foremost, and to not look and compare yourself to others, but to just focus on what's within. And then once you get into practice, to recognize it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of barriers to entry in certain ways. There's going to be a lot of challenges, but like you said, just keep that intention that you're going to make it and keep pushing forward. If you just shared a couple last messages to that student who's really trying to just understand chiropractic better and differentiate it from other directions that they might be considering. Like right now, it's probably up right next to physical therapy, or up next to maybe becoming a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner. Why would somebody choose chiropractic in that path as opposed to some of the others after they get to understand what it is?
Right. Well, I would say that first off, all those professions I would recommend if a person wanted to go in them. Of course, I'm partial as a chiropractor because I feel, particularly out of the ones you just mentioned, we have the greatest range and depth in which to help people, because we can do many of the same things that they're talking about too in terms of recommendations. At the same time, if a person is going to, go into debt and they don't have a good business sense, and not so much business in terms of capitalist sense, but just in terms of initiative and drive, then I would kind of caution them. I do think certain personality types do better in chiropractic than others, and particularly in the sense of you don't have to be super aggressive, but it does help to be somewhat outgoing. And you have to be, if you're reserved by nature, you're going to have to learn to come out of yourself, because our profession is not automatic. It's not like we go to a hospital and we just have a job. We have to create it. So it requires kind kind of an entrepreneurial sense along with a healthcare sense. I think one of the benefits, though, that we have too, though, is that we get a chance to touch people and really care for them in a close way. And I would say for myself, I've worked as a family practitioner, even though I had a lot of experience in sports. I wanted to work with families, and I've had the joy to work with as many as 4 generations over 30, almost 31 years I've been in practice, Um, and it's interesting. You see a great grandmother's back or spine, and you see that same back and spine reproduced 4 times. I've seen that, just in terms of genetics. Even the texture of the soft tissue feels similar. And so you learn about people, you learn about bodies. Um, you get a chance to work with people in a way that is safe and transformative. And yet, to be quite honest, you don't get calls at 3 a.m. in the morning rushing you to the hospital, which I'm kind of glad, to be quite honest. I wouldn't want to be on call like that. In my heart, I have much respect for them. And even right now, the first responders having to work in the hospitals, that's quite intense.
Yeah.
And at some point, if we were going to be in the hospitals a lot, we would have to be there too. And I've worked throughout the entire COVID period, partially, just a little bit. And that's with masks, shields, and gloves, and wipes, and everything, And I would tell a young person right now that if they want to have a profession that deals with their entire person and is able to integrate them holistically into this resurgence that the planet is going on in terms of trying to rediscover certain roots. Chiropractic is a part of indigenous healthcare. And this is what I tell chiropractors as they go around the world, because there's a certain missionary aspect to chiropractic that I really recoil from, because within that missionary approach, sometimes there's an arrogance as if we are teaching third world people something that they don't know. And it's really incorrect, because in many cases, chiropractic, of course, we probably have a more refined form, but in many respects, it's just the hands part of their traditional healing system. Almost all of these healing systems, traditionally, from Ayurveda to Chinese medicine to Twana to Huna, have manipulative components. In fact, I named my office Imhotep Chiropractic and Wellness Center because the oldest manuscript on the manual therapy is the Edwin Smith Papyrus out of Egypt. Of course, they didn't call it Edwin Smith, but it basically is talking about 46 cases of manual healing and surgery that was done in ancient Egypt. And the cases, the text was around 1800 BC, but it was based on oral teachings that had come from the times of Imhotep, which was around a set of that. Because you think about it in terms of indigenous healing systems and ceremonial systems, laying on of hands and various forms of touch came naturally. The early human beings from 300,000 years earlier, were inherently, what made us human was empathy. And a natural somatic response to empathy, to feeling connected to somebody, is to reach out and touch them, And it doesn't take a wild guess to see that. Well, empirically and clinically, early peoples could see that, wow, when I touched so-and-so, just kept my hand there, for whatever reason, emotionally, spiritually, or physically, they felt better. And you could see how just that could evolve into various techniques of healing through their hands, So I tell, chiropractors, don't look at it as if you're practicing some minority profession or something like that. What we do is ancient. And if you connect it back to its indigenous roots, and I have asked people to go back even through their own culture, indigenously. Everyone, sooner or later, you will hit some indigenous culture. And incorporate that to a certain degree. Some of the people that I work with right now, particularly from the National Compositors Network, Maestro Jerry Teo shares this concept, what they call la cultura cura, basically how one's culture has its own cure. And so if we kind of broaden our horizons as health practitioners and bring in some of these type of ideas, along with, of course, the cutting edge science, I really encourage chiropractors to investigate somatics, epigenetics, and psychoneuroimmunology. I do think those three fields will allow us in the future to speak the most advanced language of the body and shift our focus away from pain, because as emerging technology develops, nanotechnology, they may conquer joint pain with nanobots. So we want to get in the realm where people come to us whether they feel good or not. We'll make you feel better. And with the empowering knowledge of these sciences, we can really go off into the next age, because people are going to be still desiring a certain degree of realness and authenticity. Even in these Zoom calls right now, the thing that people miss the most is what? Touch. Human beings would not have survived if we had to have gone 1,000 years or more on Zoom calls.
Right.
The alienation would have just been too devastating, you know? So this is a reminder of who we are as a human species, what has made us function, and how to be appreciative and more grateful as time goes on.
Well said. Can you touch just briefly on D.D. Palmer and the concept of tone and how you just went back, historically speaking, into the origins of touch as a healing art, and then D.D. Palmer basically created something called chiropractic, at least that's what he called it, and he founded it on the principle of tone. Can you speak to how he created this construct of chiropractic back then, and maybe how it relates to psychoneuroimmunology or epigenetics today?
That's a good question. Well, first off, you got to remember, Didi was a magnetic healer. So his roots was in the idea that there's a vital substance within the body, and of course, in chiropractic, is known as innate intelligence. That's the later concept. As a magnetic healer, he just would agree with the idea of vital force, Elaine Vital, that there's something inside of your body that is non-material, that is animating and to some extent nourishing the other parts. And from his perspective, the interface between that non-material entity, either vital force or later innate intelligence, and the body was the nervous system. Now, where the new sciences, and I might add too, not only numerology, electromagnetism is something that has to be studied, because what I've tried to investigate and still haven't quite found totally is, where does innate intelligence meet the physical body? And there's a big gap between the nervous system and innate intelligence. And so the fields of electromagnetism, psychoneuroimmunology, and epigenetics may fill in some of the gaps between that, because with these sciences, various other forms of body communication fields, as well as sophisticated hormonal systems, will be discovered that will show clearly that link between the mind, the body, and the spiritual aspects. The ancients have intuited that for years. You know, Chinese medicine is based on qi. Ayurvedic medicine is based on prana. You know, Hawaiian medicine is based on huna. So we didn't invent that. We just have DD basically came up with another language for that interface between the spiritual and the physical realm within the body. Okay, and so I think the idea that, for instance, thoughts can change the body if you look at epigenetics, and this is where what's our doctor's name?
Bruce Lipton.
Bruce Lipton. Thank you, Dr. Lipton work, and I took some of his workshops, but I'd already been familiar to some extent with his work, and it's groundbreaking in the sense that not only do you rely on long-term mutations to account for changes within the human system, what his work shows is that to some extent, within a generation or within one's lifetime, they can change DNA structure because there's an interface between our neurohormonal system and possibly the electromagnetic system as well, and the release of certain proteins that control the entry and exit out of our cells. And within that, there's a direct link then to changes within the DNA in a short-term period. So, for instance, in American history, for instance, it can be shown now to some extent, at least that I've tried to do that, how the trauma of the slave experience could shape people right then and there, Africans who experienced that, and make them more susceptible to certain diseases. And that can be then passed on intergenerationally. And it's how we could see trauma can be passed down. And so this has a lot of import in the social sciences as well as social justice movements, because it gives activists a new language in which to discuss trauma and a little bit more scientific credence that trauma is real and it is impactful. And so as chiropractors, the more we understand these languages along with our chiropractic language, we allow ourselves to enter into these kind of dialogues and influence them uh, in significant ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautiful. No, thank you so much. There was a lot of beautiful perspectives shared. There, if you're a student and you just listen to this interview, please watch it back. Take some notes on some of the different figures, different healing modalities, different forms of scientific study and inquiry, and go and investigate for yourself these different fields of study that are related to the field of chiropractic, because you want to make as informed a decision as you can before you go to chiropractic school, before you make this huge financial investment in yourself and commit your life to becoming a chiropractor. It's an identity, but it's also it comes with a whole set of commitments that you're making, whether you realize it or not, to yourself. So, Kweli, thank you so much for sharing these insights, and I believe it's very valuable to any prospective students to hear from you, because you've lived it, but you've also continued to investigate how chiropractic truly is connected to indigenous wisdom, indigenous healing, and how it can be transcultural, how it can connect with cultures worldwide. And my vision is to see chiropractors sprouting up in different communities, different cultures that it's never existed before. And I believe it would be a beautiful world, or a more connected community with chiropractors in there. So,
Can I give one more? Can I give one more message?
of
I would
course.
just say this too: if you're in chiropractic school, you want to make sure that you do everything possible to prepare yourself to be the chiropractor that you want to be. I tell students, you use chiropractic school as your lowest baseline measurement. You don't want to do that. You want to uh, use your studies, but then you want to take a lot of outside seminars. You want to practice. You're using your chiropractic school training as just the baseline, but it's not responsible for creating the doctor that you want to be. And so that is up to you. If you want to study something, most of these fields are right laterally across from you. Once you become equipped in medical terminology, you can read the literature. And so I encourage you to really be self-motivated while you're in school, form study groups so that you can adjust. You want to have really good hands when you come out of school. And you want to rely on techniques that are less risky depending on your skill. If you're a very skilled adjuster, you can use a little bit more force. because you know when and when not to use it. But if you know that you're not an exceedingly skilled adjuster, then you want to gravitate toward techniques that have less force, because then you will be open to less injury. And trust me, you're entering into an environment business-wise where litigation happens. And so the best insurance against that is that you're confident and really can hit the ground running when you come out of school. And the only way to do that is to have practiced and know what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Every student, if you want to reach Kweli, we'll have links to connect with his resources. He's developed many resources for people that are interested in learning about holistic health, the environment, its connection to sociocultural implications in our society these days. So, Kweli, thank you so much for taking the time today, brother, and I really appreciate you
Good
sharing.
time.
No doubt.